The fascinating thing about a survival-based childhood is that when you bring that into adulthood, meaning that you develop in a survival-based way, you're essentially out of touch with your own core authenticity. This goes really deep, and it's fascinating also how there's an entire theme of avoidance here. First, I will define survival, specifically survival-based childhoods, and exactly what that is. So survival-based childhoods consists of basically when you don't get healthy boundaries, when you don't get individuation and differentiation. You're essentially a person developing in a system that doesn't allow for independence. It doesn't allow for you to develop in a way that you would basically become your own autonomous individual. There are no healthy boundaries. You don't get to be an individual early on and develop that way. No, instead, what you get is a bunch of boundary violations, a bunch of intergenerational fucked upness that is passed down onto you, a bunch of expectations, a bunch of projections because the people that raised you, they lacked healthy boundaries, they lacked healthy means of dealing with their own shit. So essentially, you were just raised with their stuff. That is the survival based thing. All of these expectations from grandparents, so on and so forth, of how you should be, who you should be, all of these different things. This is what leads you to be, I won't say, what I want to say is somebody who is basically inauthentic. Now, let me explain the reason why I say inauthentic. Survival is interesting because fight, flight, freeze, fawn are basically what it entails. What are those? Well, you have to be somebody other than who you would otherwise be in order to receive love. You have to be an overachiever. You have to be a people pleaser. You have to be somebody that is not authentic to the core of you. That's really what survival is. Survival is that you're basically doing something or being somebody that is other. I mean, it's not that it's like other, it's more so that it's like, imagine you're raised in a way where you learn to wear masks. You learn to do things that don't feel authentic to your intuition. Makes sense, right? So say, for instance, your intuition is screaming no, but mommy and daddy's love require you to say yes. And so with that, you are shutting down and fawning, people pleasing. So actually, the survival-based childhood is setting you up to ignore your intuition, to ignore these feelings inside of you that are communicating, I shouldn't do this, but the only way that I'm going to get mommy and daddy's love is if I do the things that I don't want to do. So now you're developing in a way where you're essentially, I'm going to use the word avoiding here because avoidance in and of itself is a massive theme along this entire timeline. You're essentially avoiding the authenticity, the core identity of you. And you're basically molding yourself subconsciously and unconsciously. You wouldn't be doing this if you were older and you realized what it was that you were actually doing, because survival is just so interesting. So essentially, you're molding yourself in a way that your parents or the people around you want you to. They want you to be somebody other than who you would normally be. You see, like in households where, for instance, there are certain things that are unacceptable. You're taught that they're bad. It's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just intergenerational fucked upness. But you're taught about these ideas of things that you basically should avoid. And this could even probably go into Jungian theory, Carl Jung, and like all of the shadow aspects of the self. Because what is it other than avoidance or negligence, abandonment, sacrifice, getting rid of a part of yourself, suppressing a part of yourself because you are being taught that it is unacceptable. And because the thing that you crave the most, probably from your parents, is the love, the acceptance, the validation, the guidance, you need to actually let go of who you really are and become this other version of yourself to then receive the love, the acceptance, the validation, the approval. And so then with that, like, yeah, survival. You developed in survival. So with that, how well do you actually know yourself? And are you aware that there is probably a version of yourself that is separate from the version of you that was raised in survival? Is it painful to even consider that there is a version of you that is to be, if you so choose to, tapped into, better understood? Like, for instance, if the way that you were raised, you were taught that you had to people please, you were taught that you had to do things that you didn't want to do in order to receive love, validation, approval, all of those things, wouldn't it make sense then that there is also, if not a version of you, something within you that wants to choose differently? Getting in touch with that core is the important thing here. And I would argue that it's essentially a matter of avoidance that anybody would not be getting in touch with that core. Maybe it's a matter of fear. Maybe you're afraid that if you do get in touch with that, you would realize that, oh shit, you were raised in survival. You were raised in fight, flight, freeze, fawn. You were raised to avoid, to neglect yourself. All of these different characteristics of the things, the process of development of an individual, the ego state. You look at Freudian psychology, psychoanalytic theory, the id, the ego, and the superego. The development of the ego state, right? That middle identity that it's kind of like back and forth between the id and the superego. The ego state, how well are you aware of that? How much did it actually get a chance to develop in a healthy way? Are you avoiding anything within yourself? Are you avoiding potentialities? Are you avoiding doing things so drastically different because you're afraid that if you do so drastically different, your life would transform in ways that you thought were not possible for yourself, which then would place you into this space of confusion, kind of like realizing, oh shit, I've just followed this entire script this whole time, doing a bunch of things that I've never wanted to. And here I am in a state of fucking utmost confusion because I am seemingly, exceedingly absurdly fucking out of touch with my core identity. When a person is raised in survival, again, say for instance, they become a people pleaser. If you're doing things that you don't want to do, I would argue that, and I'm not claiming fact or truth here, but I would argue that you're essentially out of touch with what it is that you actually want. Say for instance, you want to say no because you're just simply not fucking comfortable with doing the thing, but you say yes. Imagine years and years of that. Imagine just simply appeasing, simply people pleasing, simply fawning, even though you don't want to do it, and you develop that way. So essentially you develop in a way where your ego state has all of these, slashes and stuff, and you're marred and scathed in a way that has you believing that you have to be this person that just people pleases. And I'm not going to say that you're fake. I'm going to say that you were raised in survival and you learned to people please. You learned to fawn, which is exactly the reality here. Survival is very fascinating. Survival-based childhoods are very fascinating. And there's a contrast there with the opposing healthy childhoods. No childhood is perfect. No parent is perfect. But there is a difference between a healthy or healthier childhood and one that is survival-based. In a healthy or healthier childhood, the child gets healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation. And with that, essentially what they get is a healthy ego state with a healthier and connected core identity. They're not people pleasing because they feel like they have to. They're doing what's fucking authentic to them, authentic for them, regardless of what anybody else thinks about it. And so, with this theme of avoidance, genuinely, how well do you know yourself? Are there things that you're avoiding? And also, it's like, well, if you were to stop living in survival, you can continue living in survival. I mean, it's kind of, not to judge anybody, but if you're an adult and you're still living in survival, why are you still living in survival? When instead you could take yourself out of that gray box and choose to really get in touch with yourself and to really better understand yourself. Because you can. Sure, it's uncomfortable. Sure, it's different from what you've been used to, but you absolutely can. Yeah, you can. Isn't that wild? If you were raised in survival, you developed in a way that basically got you comfortable and familiar with survival, and you just continued to live that way. You continued to defend yourself when you don't need to, run away when you don't need to, freeze, shut down when you don't need to, and fawn, people please when you don't need to. Actually, let me just explore survival at the very ending of this video just to make this make more sense, to understand or to help people understand what's actually going on here. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. These main characteristics of survival. You find yourself getting defensive because you don't know yourself that well, and you think that somebody else's boundary violations have something to do with you, and so you fight back. Flight. None of this is. I'm not claiming these examples as fact or as truth, but I'm just doing the best that I can to give examples for all this stuff. Flight, running away, maybe avoidance. Avoidance is very important to understand here. Shutting down, not saying how you feel because you feel like if you do, you're going to lose something or you're going to be abandoned. And people pleasing is very much similar to all of that stuff. People pleasing is doing things that you don't want to do because you feel like if you don't do them, I don't know, you'll be abandoned, you'll be judged. So imagine living life like that. Imagine living life really out of touch with yourself and what is absolutely most authentic to you. I personally believe, based on everything that I've learned in this area, when you're raised in survival, you're not really being authentic. I wouldn't say that you're fake. I used to hear that word all the time growing up. I just don't like it. You can live that way if you want to. But I would argue that you're probably also living in a shadow state where you are a version of yourself that is more so less focused on yourself and more focused on other people. And your life would drastically fucking transform if you stopped being so focused on other people and more focused on yourself. And it's fascinating because the path to recovery, I don't like that word recovery, the path to healing, the path to coming back to yourself has so much more to do with, it's not even being selfish. It's more so choosing yourself. You're allowed to choose yourself no matter what anybody has taught you. You are. You're absolutely allowed to choose yourself. And it's a healthy thing because let me make this very clear. You're actually not giving people the best and healthiest version of you if you're not choosing yourself and putting yourself first. Because if what you're giving people is a people pleasing version of you, then essentially what's happening is they're not getting an authentic version of you. And that's really to be understood and not confused. If I were to give somebody a people pleasing version of me, they wouldn't be getting the authentic version of me. They would be getting a, oh, please like me, love me, validate me, approve of me because I don't see my own wholesome identity for what it is. And I rely on you for my identity. Understanding how fucked up, unhealthy, and unstable that is very important.